Communication. The communication process. Communication is integral to our daily lives and is a critical element in sport and physical activity. In many situations, it's not what you know, but how well you can communicate that information to others. Good communication skills are among the most important ingredients contributing to the performance enhancement and personal growth of sport and exercise participants. To be a successful sport and exercise professional, you must develop strong communication skills. Although the same process occurs in all communication, the purposes of communication can vary. All communication contains some content as well as relation, how we feel about someone, within the message. Communication may incorporate several purposes: persuasion, evaluation, information, motivation, and for problem solving. There are two basic ways to communicate: interpersonally and intrapersonally, as well as nonverbal communication. Interpersonal communication involves at least two people and a meaningful exchange. This is what we typically think of as a traditional communication conversation. The sender intends to affect the response of a particular person or persons. The message or content may be received by the person for whom it was intended, by persons by whom it was not intended, or both. On occasion, the message may get distorted so that the sender's intended message does not get transmitted as originally intended. Nonverbal communication is sometimes referred to as nonverbal cues. Nonverbal communication is critical to imparting and receiving information. Behavior and elements of speech, aside from the words themselves, that transmit meaning. Nonverbal communication includes pitch, speed, tone, volume of voice, gestures and facial expressions, body posture, stance, and proximity to the listener, eye movements and contact, and even dress and appearance. You can read a lot from someone's nonverbal communication. It's what you don't say that sometimes conveys a message. Intrapersonal communication is sometimes called self-talk. This is the communication we have with ourselves. We talk to ourselves a lot, and this inner dialogue is important. What we say to ourselves usually helps shape and predict how we act and perform. Self-talk can help motivate. We will talk more about this in the chapter on concentration. Effective communication can make the difference between success and failure among individuals and teams. Thankfully, effective communication can be taught to coaches and managers. There is a self-assessment scale to help individuals increase their self-awareness and their communication style, called the Communication Self-Evaluation Assessment. People are often unaware of the many nonverbal cues that they use while communicating. It is estimated that nearly 50 to 70% of all information in communication is received through nonverbal communication. Nonverbal messages are less likely to be under conscious control, and therefore they are harder to hide than a verbal message. Nonverbal message characteristics include physical appearance. Our first impression from people often comes from a physical appearance. The way we dress can convey powerful information to others. Athletes need to be careful about imparting information, whether positive or negative, through dress. What about posture? How do we carry ourselves? Our gait and our posture sends a message to others. Someone who shuffles along with their head down and maybe their hands in their pocket may convey sadness compared to someone with a bouncy step that may suggest a sense of control and confidence. Body language influences athletes' perceptions of their competition, and that perception affects the performance needs. Body position. Body position refers to personal space between you and others, and to the position of your body with respect to others. Body position is an important aspect of proxemics, which is the study of how people communicate by the way they use space. Gestures. People's gestures often convey messages, whether you want them to or not. Touching. Touching is a powerful form of nonverbal communication that can be utilized to calm someone or express affection or other feelings dependent upon the situation. We need to be cognizant of sexual harassment when utilizing touch as a communication tool. You must make certain that touching is appropriate and is welcomed by the student or the athlete. Touching should be restricted to public places to minimize any misinterpretation of the meaning of your touch. Facial expressions. Your face is the most expressive part of your body. Eye contact can be vital to expressing feelings. A smile is usually considered a universal form of communication and easily crosses language barriers. And voice characteristics. The sound of a voice can reinforce or undercut verbal communication. Some say it's not what you say, but how you say it. The voice's quality often betrays true feelings, moods, and attitudes. Voice characteristics including pitch, high or low, tempo, which is the speed, volume, loud or soft, rhythm or the cadence, and articulation, enunciation. An important take-home message for sending messages effectively. Nonverbal messages are extremely important. They are harder to hide and consciously control, and they are often accurate indicators of how a person really feels. There are many guidelines for sending effective verbal and nonverbal messages as a leader. Some important things to keep in mind. For leaders, communication is the foundation for credibility and even respect. Credibility is reflected in its members' attitudes about trustworthiness. Trust is linked to concepts of honesty, integrity, sincerity, and truthfulness. As we start examining a coach-athlete communication, what's the big deal with communication anyway? Well, it's very difficult to regain someone's trust once it's broken. Words and nonverbal communication have a huge impact. Words can really hurt. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will always hurt me. Once words or gestures are out there, you can't take them back. Communication breakdown can be misinterpreted. Some common perception problems can occur among coach and athlete communications. There is a significant difference that exists between leader and follower perceptions of leadership behavior and the situation. The leader often views the situation as more ideal than do followers. And followers often see a big difference between what is happening and what they think should be happening. We can help facilitate communication by participating in active listening. The best way to listen is to actively listen. Active listening involves asking questions, paraphrasing, attending to main and supporting ideas. Active listening is also acknowledging and responding, giving appropriate feedback, and paying attention to the speaker's total communication. This includes verbal and nonverbal communication. Some keys to participating in active listening. Paraphrase what the speaker said when applicable. These are some typical lead-ins for paraphrasing. What I hear you saying is, let me see if I've got this right. You said, what you're telling me is. With these, then you will lead in and you will paraphrase what the individual said. Don't mistake hearing for listening. Of all the things that make an individual feel accepted, significant, and worthwhile, none is more vital than being listened to. Good listening shows sensitivity and encourages an open communication of ideas and feelings. In order to do this, you have to mentally prepare to listen. You must put away distractions and focus on the person's communication. If you are going into a difficult situation, you may want to rehearse your message to make sure you are not sending cues other than what you intend. Being a supportive listener communicates that you are with the speaker and value the person's message. So how do we do this? Here are some tips to being a supportive listener. Some keys to supportive listening include using supportive behaviors. These behaviors communicate the message that the other person is acknowledged, understood, and accepted. You are using supportive listening behaviors when you can describe the other's behavior instead of trying to evaluate or attack it. Focus on immediate thoughts and feelings, are not calculating or manipulative. Ask open-ended questions to encourage the person to share their feelings, are empathetic, not indifferent, and remain open to new ideas, perspectives, and the possibility of change. Use confirming behaviors as you listen. Let people know that you are with them in the conversation and that you understand their message, even if you don't agree with it. Confirming behaviors such as rephrasing what the person is saying can help to show that you are paying attention, accepting, and understanding of their message. Using verbal and nonverbal listening behaviors. Nonverbal behaviors communicate interest and attention. Verbal behaviors should communicate an understanding and acknowledgement of what the speaker is saying and feeling. Be aware that people react individually or differently to the way you communicate. Some tips for aware listening include being flexible. You may have to try different listening strategies. There is not one best listening strategy. Different situations require different strategies. Be alert for barriers or breakdowns in communication. Barriers involve noise, such as other people talking while you are trying to listen. Breakdowns can also occur when messages are misinterpreted or misdirected. Often we are not aware that a breakdown even occurred until something bad happens that can be traced back to the breakdown. Communicating effectively requires skill and effort on the part of both the people involved. The process can be complicated and frequently breaks down. One of the main reasons communication is sometimes problematic is that many people believe that it is others rather than themselves who are ineffective communicators. Therefore, they do not see the need to improve their own communication skills. Some breakdowns in communication can come from sender failures. Sender failures occur as senders may transmit a message poorly. There may be ambiguity or inconsistency in sending the message. This can be seen in the game of telephone. This all starts when somebody says, maybe blue would work better than green, which may then get translated into, he says blue is better than green. The next person interprets this as, he says change to blue. The next receiver hears this as, but green tested so much better than blue. Interpreted as, she says green is better than blue. And finally, she insists on keeping it green. The message was transmitted poorly and was then inconsistent as it was transmitted among different group members. Receiver failures can also occur if the listener fails to listen carefully, resulting in misinterpretation. Ineffective communication is a double-edged sword. Receivers as well as senders can contribute to this miscommunication. Barriers to effective communication include the receiver not paying attention to the sender, a lack of trust between the people communicating, social and hereditary differences causing misinterpretations between the sender and the receiver, differences in the mental set or perception between people, embarrassment, a tendency to tell people what they want to hear, and difficulties in expression or reluctance to communicate. Some guidelines for sending effective verbal and nonverbal messages. Be direct. People who avoid straightforward communication assume that others know what they want or feel. Use your own message. Use I and my, not we or the team, when referencing your message. What you are saying is what you believe, not necessarily what everyone else believes. Be complete and specific. Provide the person with all of the information that they need to fully understand your message. Be clear and consistent. Avoid double messages. Double messages send contradictory meanings, and usually the person sending them is afraid to be direct. State your needs and your feelings clearly. We must be able to share our feelings and what we need to avoid miscommunication. Separate fact from opinion. This is extremely hard. State what you saw, heard, or know, and then clearly identify any opinions or conclusions that you have about these facts. Focus on one thing at a time. Organize your thoughts before speaking. Deliver messages immediately. Do not delay sending messages. Responding immediately makes for more effective feedback than a delayed response does. Avoid hidden agendas. Make sure your message does not contain a hidden agenda, which means that the state purpose of the message is not the same as the real purpose. Be supportive. If you want someone else to listen, do not deliver the message with threats, sarcasm, negative comparison, or judgment. Be consistent with your nonverbal message. Conflicting messages between verbal and nonverbal cues can confuse people and hinder future communication. Reinforce with repetition. Repeat key points to reinforce what you are saying. Don't do this too much, though, or other people will stop listening because it sounds like a broken record. Make messages appropriate to the receiver's frame of reference. Messages can be better understood if you tailor them to the experiences of the person with whom you are communicating. And look for feedback that your message was accurately interpreted. Watch for verbal and nonverbal signals that the person to whom you are speaking is receiving the message as you intended. The second half of this lecture will focus on dealing with confrontation. Confrontation is usually a face-to-face discussion among people in conflict. Despite its negative connotation, confrontation, when properly used, can help both parties understand issues more clearly without feeling undue stress, guilt, or inadequacy. Use active and supportive listening techniques to avoid breakdowns that prevent effective communication. When to use or avoid confrontation. Avoid confrontation when you're angry. Most people regret the things that they say in anger. Do confront someone when you're in control and when you can express your feelings constructively, and only when you have a well-thought-out reason for doing so. Once you've decided to use confrontation, we will also need to know how to confront people. Here are some things to remember. Express your feelings constructively. Think before you speak. Understand the situation and the person. Be empathetic. Be tentative, but not wishy-washy. And proceed gradually. We don't want to come on full tilt when we could have a conversation instead of getting angry. The do's and don'ts of confronting. Do convey that you understand and you value the relationship with a person. Do go slowly and think about what you want to communicate. Do try to understand the other person's position. And do listen carefully to what the other person is trying to communicate. Don't communicate the solution, rather focus on the problem. We are eager to tell people what to do rather than letting them figure it out on their own. Don't stop communicating. Don't use put-downs, and don't rely on nonverbal hints to communicate your thoughts. The sandwich approach to constructive criticism is the most effective way to present criticism to others. The sandwich approach is a technique for offering constructive feedback. This allows us to be sensitive but still communicate our criticism. The sandwich approach consists of 3 sequential elements: a positive statement, a future orientation instruction, and a compliment. An example of the sandwich approach. Remember, there are 3 parts: the positive statement, future-oriented statement, and a compliment. The positive statement: you're really working hard out there. Once the person has become receptive through hearing the opening positive comment, then they will pay attention to the second part, the instructive feedback. The instructive feedback: maybe next time try to slow down and not get ahead of the music. The key aspect to the sandwich approach is the future-oriented instruction. This provides the instruction, behavior, or strategy for the person to use the next time they perform a skill. This comment must not ridicule, embarrass, or criticize the individual. And finally, the compliment. You're getting there. Keep up the good work. After giving the instructional feedback, make sure that the individual still feels good about their performance. The coach-athlete communication. Some practical suggestions. Recognize individual differences among athletes. Use a style of communication that is comfortable. Be generous with praise and encouragement. Use consistent nonverbal communication. Exercise personal self-control. Be supportive and empathetic with needs. And discuss communication needs with the team and individual athletes. The coach-athlete communication is one of the most important relationships in sport because it has been demonstrated to determine the athlete's satisfaction, self-esteem, and performance accomplishments. The complete dyad is a questionnaire called the Fundamental Interpersonal Relations Orientation Behavior was administered to coaches and athletes to assess their self-perceived, wanted, and expressed typical social behaviors in the need areas of inclusion, control, and affection. Coaches and athletes were determined to be either compatible or incompatible. When coaches and athletes are compatible, they have good communication and rewarding behaviors were present with the coach-athlete interaction. When coaches and athletes are incompatible, they are lacking communication and rewarding behavior is likely to be absent. It was concluded that inclusion behavior was the predominant factor contributing to incompatibility in coach-athlete dyads, so quality communication is the key. When examining coach-athlete communication, we find that good communicators establish open lines of communication, are honest, fair, and consistent, and respect athletes or workers inside of the athletic setting. So how do we know if communication is good? Acknowledge that both verbal and nonverbal communication can take multiple forms. We also must acknowledge that there has to be a balance between communication and the observed compatibility of the coach-athlete model. Some communication models say we should look for positive and negative manifestations of closeness and like mutual respect, common beliefs, trust, or even love. Communication, dedication, sacrifice, and satisfaction. We should also look for complementary behaviors, how well the coach and athlete complement each other's strengths, roles, tasks, and abilities to adapt. So what makes coach-athlete communication so good? There's quality interaction, communication, and respect among both parties. The barriers to coach-athlete communication include a difference of opinions resolvable by common sense, the clash of personalities in the group, a conflict of task or social roles in the group, struggling for power or status between each other, and either leader or group communication breakdowns.